Hi, in today's video I'm going to be covering how to use emacs with your shush keys so that you can dial into a remote machine and edit files without being prompted for your password. What I'm going to do is connect over SSH, so shush colon server name Okay, so you can see there that I've connected over SSH and dialed into the machine, and you can see we have some file there, so cat some file. So this is some text. So you can see that I basically connected over SSH using my shush keys, which allows me then to edit files on the remote machine using emacs. So what I'm going to do is go through the setup for this, and also how you can actually tangle files from an org document over SSH as well. So the first thing is your zshrc. Now, what I found is sometimes ZSH and SSH don't play nicely. So what we do is we set the term that we dial into to be dumb, and we unset a lot of ZSH options and just create a plain prompt, because this happens, for instance, if the machine you're dialing into has got ZSH set as a shell and has a custom prompt. So basically what this line does is it just sets a plain prompt when it dials into the remote machine. So that's the first step. The next thing that we're going to actually cover is the setup in emacs. So if I just come down here, I'll just while I mention it, this is a block of code that I use from the emacs wiki, which sets creates a directory in temp where it stores all my backup and autosave files. So by default, what happens is it usually saves autosave files and backup files into your .emacs directory, and it just creates a lot of clutter. And basically, this block of code basically saves everything in temp emacs, and you can see here it's created this file. Yeah, so that's basically where it's storing all my backups. So that's just a quick note. Now the shush config, here we go. A couple of things. ZSH can give you problems with DOAS. DOAS is an alternative to sudo. And what happens is when you're using ZSH, you put in your password when you're using DOAS, and it sort of hangs and doesn't work. And basically the fix is to switch to using another shell inside of emacs. It's not going to affect your actual shell that you're using in the terminal. This is just what's being used by emacs, and actually using ZSH has no benefits actually being used inside emacs. So what we do is we say, after traps loaded, set the shell to user bin sh, which is actually a symbolic link to the dash shell. So that's the first fix that we do to avoid any problems with ZSH and DOAS. The next thing here we have is a section where it says parse config, and what it's basically doing is, you can see down here, it's parsing the .ssh config file, and basically that is where you keep all of your configuration options for different servers. So basically, it will see all the servers that you've got set up in that file so that you can easily connect to them. Okay. And yeah, we set the default method to SSH. So that's a couple of things that we actually sort of need to get set up. Now, the other thing, if I just come across, is what we need to actually set up in our SSH config. So what we need to do in our SSH config file, that's .ssh config, in your home directory, is we create a block of code like this. We say host $, asterisk for a wildcard. And what we have to do is we say identity file ~/.ssh id _ rsa.pub. And that's your, when you create the shush private public keys, that's your public key. So what you have to do is create this block code. So it's basically any host, that's where the identity file is on your computer. And we set a server alive interval 5 because Emacs doesn't know if an SSH connection is hanging, and so that solves this problem. So this block of code basically lets Emacs use the public SSH key for any of your shush connections. So that's basically what you've got to edit in your SSH config. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is actually show you tangling or writing out a file from Emacs over SSH using tramp. So what we've got here is a simple block of code called example script, and all the script does is say echo example script. So you can see here the block is called example script, and it's the source is set to sh. We've got the shebang and a bit of code. So what we've got now is the actual, let me just make that a bit smaller so it's easier to see, what the syntax is for connecting to a remote machine. So it'd be / SSH : the server name : and then the file path. So as you can see down here, what we're doing is using noweb to reference the block of code above. So instead of actually putting the block of code in here, we're referencing it by the name that we created above the block of code. We say begin source sh, noweb, yes. And what we're doing here is tangle / SSH. So this is the same sort of syntax that you actually use when you're doing it manually in Emacs, as I showed you previously. So SSH, the server name, and then the file path here. And then, as you can see down here, what we've got is the tangle mode, identity 0755, and that basically makes the script executable. So now, if I tangle this, and by tangle, what you can do is say you can either tangle an entire document with Control-C, Control-V-T, or you can tangle an individual code block when the cursor is over the code block by running Control-U, Control-C, Control-V-T. You get to remember these commands, so it's not an issue. But basically what I can now do, if I come back down here, is with the cursor here, I can do Control-U. You can see it's now tangled that code block. So if I now dial into the remote machine, example script, you can see it prints out example script. So what I can now do is, let's edit this and put some more text in. Okay, echo this This is a super amazing script that does something useful. Okay, saves that, and now I can just come back to here. Again, run Control U, Control C, VT, tangled it, run it again, and you can see this is a super amazing script that does something useful. So what this basically means is that you can have an org document with all the config files for a server on your local machine and deploy it over SSH to that machine with a single set of keystrokes and set all the permissions in one go. So for instance, if you need to set something up on a server, config files in different locations. In the previous video I showed you how you can manage your root config files using an org mode document. You can do the same thing over SSH. So again, basically steps: the zsh prompt. So this is if the remote machine has got the shell set to zsh. This basically fixes an issue that you can sometimes get when you're trying to dial into the remote machine. So what happens is I've got a Mac that's running zsh as the shell, and if I dial in via the terminal, what typically happens is when you press a key, it prints out the key twice. And that's just the zsh issue. So this line fixes that problem. It basically sets the prompt on the remote machine just to be a clean, simple prompt. As you can see, the PS1 is just going to be $sign like that. So that's the first fix actually in the terminal. So that if you're connecting to the remote machine that's running zsh, that will fix it. The second thing that we did was in our emacs config. Again, this is the backup directory bit of code that I mentioned that's from the Emacs wiki. So if you want to avoid your all your backup files and your autosave files being created in your Emacs directory, you can use this block of code. And then what we have down here is the actual tramp config. Let me just increase this a bit. So again, this is its first line is to avoid zsh problems that are particular to using DOAS, which is a pseudo alternative that I covered in the previous video. Now this next block of code, basically what this does is it looks through etc zsh underscore config or tilde/.ssh rather config, which is where you configure your list of servers. Okay, now the next line here, basically this is saying don't back up things that you edit over tramp. So typically, you know, if you're editing a password file, for instance, on your machine, you don't want it backed up and a sort of copy of the password file lying around. So this block of code basically says that things are opened by sudo or DOAS, don't back them up. And we can set the default tramp method there. So those are just a couple of things you need to set up in your zshrc, your emacs file. And again, the last thing that we needed to do, if I come back up here, is in your shush config file, we have this block of code. And obviously I'm not going to show you my real shush config file because it's got, you know, details in it, IP addresses, that sort of thing. So you have host asterisk, so that's a wildcard that applies to all the servers. Then what we do is we set the identity file So that's your public key, so tilde/.ssh id underscore rsa.pub, and the server alive interval 5 is another fix from the emacs wiki to prevent issues if the SSH connection hangs, and that fixes the issue with emacs. So you basically put that in your sshrc file, and once you've done all of that, again, what you can do, you actually have to be at the root in diad. So when you're running commands like sudo or doas or ssh in emacs, you have to do it from the root. So I would run ssh : and these are machines I can connect to. So Mac Mini, and here then you put in the sort of like full path, like users, username, desktop, and we can then sort of create a file. So file test. You can see now I'm creating the file on the remote machine. File test, line 1, line 2. As you can see, that's written it out. And if I come across here and see here, file test, line 1, line 2. So move these, file test, some file test. Okay, and let's just tangle that file again. So we've got a script that we want to deploy to the remote machine. Got the first of all we create the name, so example script. Then we begin the source, set the language type to sh because it's a shell script. We've got the shebang, and we've got the actual code. And then basically what we have in this block of code is we're using no web. So we basically put in the name of the code block here, and we say example script ssh. So we give this block a name as well. And we begin the source, sh, no web, yes, tangle, and the syntax is /ssh : the server name from your SSH config, another colon, and then the full path to where you want the script to be written out to. And again, Control U CVT, tangled, sign in. And we've got the example script there, example script. This is a super amazing script that does something useful. So that's basically how you can connect over SSH with Emacs using your public-private keys so that you're not prompted for a password in Emacs. And the advantage of this is that it will also allow you to tangle or write out scripts from an org mode file to a remote machine. So what that basically means is you can have a org mode document like this with all the configuration files for that remote server, whether it's an FS tab, networking file, systemd, whatever it is. You have all the configurations options in this. You want to deploy them. Basically, you can create blocks like this and run a single keyboard shortcut, and it's going to deploy all the code blocks in this file to that remote machine. Not only that, but you can create multiple code blocks to deploy the scripts to multiple machines at the same time. So what I mean by that is you can just have another code block like this, but a different server that it's deployed to, like server 1, server 2. So suppose you want to suppose you've got half a dozen servers and you want to set them up all the same, with the same config. You can just basically have multiple code blocks come into the file, handle the entire document. Yeah, and what it's going to do, it's going to deploy those scripts to multiple machines at the same time over SSH using your public-private keys, prompting you for a password. So basically, you can have a single text file where you manage code for multiple servers, and you can deploy it instantly just by running a couple of keystrokes. So it's really useful to either be able to dial into a remote machine or to be able to deploy script to multiple machines at once from within Emacs. So I'll leave links to all this under the video, and that's all for now.